All right, good morning. This morning we will not be going over any part of the tabernacle. I'm sorry to say, we've been covering that for the last few weeks, but we'll be addressing a question today. It's on the issue of divorce, and I suppose every pastor is confronted with that issue. But, don't worry, if you're married and you intend to stay married, you still have something to learn from this as well. So, it's not just for single people. Or every family, I'm sure, has had the issue somewhere or the other, either between the husband and wife themselves, or cousins, or kids, or somebody has talked about it. Now, I've heard most of my life that divorce is this evil thing, and God hates divorce. It's evil. It should never ever happen. I've talked to some people, and actually, I've seen my own parents when divorce was talked about. It was if you get divorced, you're excommunicated from the church. You'll burn in hell. It's evil. And then they quote, God hates divorce, but this was actually in an email this week as well. But anytime now we know God divorced Israel then, right? We know that. So if divorce is evil and sinful, then God broke his law, being a divorcee himself, right? So anytime you find out that God's breaking his law or has broken it, I would suggest take a closer look, because we all know that's impossible. Right? So that's what we have to get to the bottom of. So this guy says, actually, he sends me 5 questions at a time. And so he's like, I grab 5 at a time. The urgent one is below. Is divorce permissible if one spouse commit fornication, and is the innocent one free to remarry? Okay, so this is remarriage after divorce, and that's a big issue. And then he quotes Matthew 19:9, which we have up there, which we'll read later. So this email question then, it will entail the subjects or issues of divorce, remarriage, adultery, and fornication then, because we know that's what Matthew 19:9 states. And we're going to be looking into those issues this morning. So we're not necessarily going to go into all the reasons why people get divorced and how it's on the rise and it's a tragic thing, which it is. But, there's a lot of subject matter to cover in just this, but we'll just be looking at what Jesus said and the Bible law about that and see if he was within that reason there. So, but we know divorce is an issue discussed in the Bible, and it is something that Christians want to know about, because there's been a lot of misunderstanding about it, especially coming from the modern church. So we'll go to Matthew 19, and we'll read verse 3. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore hath God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? And he saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And here's the verse that was in the email. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except for it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her, which is put away, doth commit adultery. His disciples say to him, If the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry. Okay, so this is what's going on here. And we'll only be looking at these verses this morning. We'll actually finish the rest of it next week, because we'll be discussing New Testament marriage and divorce. So anyway, according to verse 9, which is the one, that's the one that the clergy in the modern churches use to teach that divorce is evil, and that really there's only 2 reasons to ever get divorced. That'd be adultery, and then if you go over to 1 Corinthians 7, you'll see that would be desertion or abandonment. And I know you guys have heard this, especially from like the Baptists, the 3 A's. What is it? Abuse, adultery, abandonment. Sometimes abuse turns to addiction. So addiction, adultery, abandonment, right? You guys have heard these things. So biblically then, divorce is permissible. Here's Jesus talking about it. It's not evil. It's a way to deal with evil. Okay, let's get that straight. It's not evil, it's a way to deal with the evil. All right, and we'll see more of that as we go along this morning. So I've looked. There are absolutely no laws found anywhere in the Bible that forbid divorce. None. Instead, there are laws in place to regulate divorce. That's important. Okay, that's the subject of this morning. So no, divorce is permitted, and it was practiced. Okay? But Pastor Reed, what about that verse over there in Malachi? It says God hates divorce. What about that one, right? Nobody knows Malachi. Nobody could quote anything from it except for a quarter of a verse in chapter 2. I wish they'd read the whole book, but for people that put away the Old Testament, I hear that one all the time from the little book of Malachi. And they're like, well, read God hates divorce. We'll get there. We'll get there. So biblically, there are only 4 reasons or 4 cases for divorce. There's only 4. All right? The death of one of the parties, either naturally or death from the capital punishment, right? So death is a dissolution immediately. Till death do us part. Okay? So what incited the death penalty? There's 19 or so death penalty offenses listed in the Bible. You'll see this number's always contested because I'll read the list. You'll see that some of them can go in the same category. And these would apply to male and female too. So death penalty is adultery, rape, incest, homosexuality, bestiality, premeditated murder, smiting parents, cursing parents, sacrificing children to Molech, kidnapping, being a wizard or witch, being a false prophet or dreamer, apostasy, sacrificing to other gods, blasphemy, and failing to follow a court order or the judge's decision, and also Sabbath desecration. Now, the Sabbath desecration everybody gets all up in arms for. That actually seems to be a legislation as a special case in the wilderness. Remember the man on the 6th day, double on the 6th day, don't gather anything on the 7th? You don't really find Sabbath desecration outside of that verse as far as being a death penalty offense throughout the rest of the Bible. It seems to be special legislation for the wilderness. It seems to be. And the final one is the death of a woman from miscarriage due to assault and battery. Okay, we better look at that one. That's Exodus 21. That seems to be a little odd little one, but here, a lot of people will ask, well, that's right, Reed. You know, if miscarriage, death of the baby because of assault and battery of the woman is death penalty offense. Well, let's look at Exodus 21, if you want to. Verse 22, I'll read the law. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, okay, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Okay, so if 2 guys are fighting, the woman gets involved, or assault happens, she loses the baby, all right, because of the other party, then the judges determine, in this case it would be restitution. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. Okay, that word mischief is if the wife dies as a result of this. She was assaulted, either she miscarried or gave birth prematurely, right? If the death of the child, the judges make the decision for the restitution. If the wife dies as a complication from this, life for life. And you really think, well, why read it? Wouldn't it be life for life if the baby died? Well, not really. Not because God doesn't care about unborn children or babies, but if you really think about what we have going on here back where they were, who can prove that that is exactly what occurred and the death of the child is a direct result of that? Babies died all the time in other ways when delivering, right? So if you think about the judges here, they would have to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was indeed this assault and battery that caused the death of this child for it to be murder, right? Otherwise, it's manslaughter anyway, by accident. So you see there, the life for life is only if the woman dies. Only if the woman dies. And if you understand the marriage contract, you'll see that that has a greater implication than the child. It's not because God is wicked, but you would really have no way to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt for the death penalty to occur that the child's death was a direct result from that. Not in those days. We didn't have ultrasounds. We didn't have things like x-rays, things like that. So that was a protection thing. Okay? So anyway, we've got these death penalty offenses which we've read about, which obviously would end the marriage for one or the other. Okay, and also life sentences, I would have to extend the death penalty to the life sentences we have now. As a matter of fact, it was on the books in America late 19th century, 1887. It said if your husband dies, your marriage is over. If he gets sentenced to life in prison, which obviously the Bible doesn't cover because life in prison is not a biblical punishment, but I would extend it to where if you have a mate that is sentenced to life in prison, as far as Bible law is concerned, it would have to be the death penalty, right? And the reason for that is because divorce by death is making marriage possible because the innocent party is freed from the guilty or unclean person. You see, so that's why a life sentence would also have to include divorce, because then that person is not bound to the one in prison for life. Of course, he's not going to be able to do anything for the household being in the big house anyway. So the wife is left to fend for herself as it is, as if he was dead, right? That's why I would extend it to that as well. All right, and Jesus, in Matthew 19, he did mention in his verse that adultery was one of the cases, which was a death penalty. So you see, Jesus understood that. He upheld what we know as far as Moses' law and the death penalties. So the second reason for divorce, so first is death. The second reason is breach of contract concerning marital law. Now this one is touched on a little bit nowadays, which it's not heard of very much anymore. To a breach of contract to your wife, husbands, marital law states that you will provide food, clothing, and shelter to that woman, right? Till death do you part. Remember your vows. And also do sexual relations. So that's marital law. Food, clothing, shelter, and the two of you do sexual relations. Do sexual relations. Look at 2 Corinthians 7. We'll see if Paul understood this. We'll see why. Am I way out on a limb here? 2 Corinthians 7, 2. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Okay, we understand that. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. That due benevolence is the sexual relations. The wife has no power over her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power over his own body, but the wife. So it goes both ways. Very important. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinence. 1 Corinthians 7, 2 and 5, through 5. So that Satan tempt you not for your incontinence. So, Paul specifies that the requirement for sexual relations is all due benevolence, and to refrain from that, or to refuse one or the other from that, is defrauding your marriage partner. And that's a form of desertion. A form of desertion. Matter of fact, when I hear about these things, one or the other, it doesn't happen in marriages, that's a big red flag to Pastor Reed, because I said, look, if one or the other isn't providing food, clothing, shelter, and due benevolence, that's a form of desertion. Because Paul here says when you do that, you're defrauding your marriage partner. You're defrauding your marriage partner. So a third type of divorce is actually implied. It's not written law. We'll get to why it's implied later. And that has cases to do with mixed blood marriages and mixed marriages, which are different things in the Bible. A mixed marriage can be, you could marry blonde hair and blue-eyed Canaanite if you wish, but that's a forbidden lineage. That's a mixed marriage. It's absolutely forbidden. And of course, mixed blood marriages are as well. So yes, forbidden lineages would also have to include Ammon and Moabites, which we obviously know. We paid a high price for going with the Moabites, didn't we? Forbidden lineages. Not because the Moabites are black people or Indians. It's just a forbidden lineage. Why? Well, they were born of incest from Lot. All right, so that's forbidden for Israelites to do that. That's impurity. So the sole reason God has these mixed blood marriages and mixed marriages as forbidden is because they are not lawful unions or lawful marriages in the first place. So we'll touch on that later. All right, so anyway, mixed blood is forbidden in the Bible according to Deuteronomy 22. Leviticus 18, and you'll find a bunch of verses forbidding that. That's mixed blood. Consanguinity, okay, the Bible does absolutely forbid those, in spite of what's taught today. And you have more than 4 witnesses if you go through the laws in Deuteronomy 22, Deuteronomy 27, Leviticus 18, and Leviticus chapter 20. We'll go, and we touched on those last week. And in the case of mixed blood marriages, the Bible gave us an example that divorce is required. Divorce is required, and all you have to do is go to Nehemiah 9, Nehemiah 13, and of course Malachi 2. Okay? So, mixed marriages, forbidden lineage, those are naturally forbidden according to Deuteronomy 7, Exodus 34, and Numbers 25. Divorce is required for those according to Nehemiah 9 and Nehemiah 13. Okay, and the fourth kind of divorce is the one in which Christ is referencing here, and that's outlined in Deuteronomy 24. But before we get to that, let's look a little more closely at Matthew 19:3. We'll see what's going on here. Before we get into what exactly Jesus was referencing law-wise, look at Matthew 19:3. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Okay, so notice that the verse that's brought to our attention here in the email was Matthew 19:9. Now, that statement of Jesus is actually in response to verse 3. So, the Pharisees have brought this question to ask Jesus what his stance on divorce and remarriage is in order to tempt him or trap him or test him. We know they did this all the time. Okay, so let's get that in context. So, in order to understand this, we have to understand what's going on in a biblical and historical context then, all right? Now, this event that we're reading about in chapter 19 is paralleled in other synoptic gospels, I know. And there also seems to be a similar story of it in Matthew 5. But we're going to be in Matthew 19 this morning because it seems to give the most details out of the other gospels, all right? So, and they are key details. Now, two important events have already occurred by the time you get to Matthew 19, and that would be the Sermon on the Mount and John the Baptist's death. Okay, these have already happened. So this is current events right now. Matter of fact, Jesus just got done with the Sermon on the Mount here in Matthew. So, John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod Antipas, right? John had rebuked him for divorcing his wife, Phasaelis, right? He divorced his wife and then unlawfully married Herodias, who was the wife of his brother Herod Philip, okay? And John the Baptist spoke up on that, right? And lost his head for it, didn't he? Okay, so that's what's going on. So here we have John the Baptist saying, yes, when confronted with the government, he's like, yeah, he's done the wrong thing. That's adultery, that's incest, that's unlawful. And he died for that. Okay, so that's current events. And then the Sermon on the Mount, of course, was Jesus exposing the slavery and hypocrisy of Jewish law. Like that's the whole thing he did, didn't he? That's all he did, is he exposed Jewish law for what it is. So he's got two things going on, and one of those things he does actually mention lust and adultery at the Sermon on the Mount, doesn't he? So with these things in mind, we can see why the Pharisees would test him in this particular issue. Because they got John the Baptist, they figure they can get Jesus the John the Baptist treatment if they can get him to answer the right way. So they can trap him, okay? So that's what's going on. So what exactly was the dilemma that Jesus was put in then? Well, in the land at the time of this question, there were actually two famous schools in the land that followed one or the other rabbi's sayings. Okay, in the Jewish schools, these were Jewish schools of divinity and philosophy. Okay, and the two schools taught two very different opinions on marriage and divorce. The school of Hillel contended that a man could divorce his wife for every or any cause. In other words, for any shame, either because he found someone he liked better, or he'd ceased to love his wife, or because she'd overcooked or oversalted his dinner. Okay, it was very liberal and very popular at the time of Jesus, this school of Hillel. And actually, if you look at I actually happen to have the Talmud full set here. Tractate Yebamoth is actually the entire book on divorce and remarriage. So this is the Jewish law concerning those. Tractate Yebamoth, just on all the loopholes, really. Loopholes. So I just happen to have this. But yes, it does. And most of it I can't read at the pulpit. Most of it I can't read at the pulpit. Now, actually, we'll read some. Tractate Gittin here, which has some Jewish rabbis going back and forth about what it is they do. This one I'm going to read 90a and b, Mishnah 90a and b. And it says, a man should not divorce his wife unless he has found her guilty of some unseemly conduct. And I notice that's a very nebulous term, okay? As it says, because he has found some unseemly thing in her, whatever that is. However, even if she has merely spoiled his food, because he's found someone unseemly thing in her, even if he finds another woman more beautiful than she, as it says, it comes to pass if she finds no favor in his eyes. So see, they've taken this law of Moses and stretched it to any unseemly thing, burning his food, and then they give you a little footnote that's like, well, we're not sure if that really means burning his food. It does. It does. It's the simplest thing. Oversalting his food if he finds another wife that's prettier or he just doesn't love her anymore. This is what they were going by in the school of Hillel. Okay, and it was a very popular thing, you know. Now, the other one is the Jewish rabbi. If you're a Jewish rabbi and you traveled the country and you visited other lands, it seems to be specifically you visited other lands that were overseas. So if you're out of your area code, you actually could get married for a day. You could get married for a day. Okay, and you know, and being married means what? Well, if you're married, you can do what? Okay, all right, yeah, right. So he's out of his area code, okay? And this is what they say. All right, it's a strange statement because they're so noble. So anyway, if he's visiting a country, and here it's Persia, and the Persian custom was that he honored his guest, the rabbi, by sending him a concubine. Well, this is a very embarrassing situation for the rabbi to be sent an honorary concubine. So what's he to do? Because he's a rabbi. He can't be seen. Well, they give him if he refuses the gift, it's seen as an affront to the ruler. So the rabbi's in quite a pickle. Well, what they do then is they will provide a wife in the city he's visiting with a contract saying that the length of marriage is for a day, thus helping him to escape the royal gift. Okay, so if you're a rabbi traveling around the world doing your thing, you can go get married for a day and to a woman of the city so that you're not seen with a concubine. Okay, married for a day. At probably one of the local inns that rent by the hour, right? Right, because to save him the embarrassment of being gifted a concubine. But that's just Jewish law. That's Jewish law. The littlest loopholes they'll find. Now these are what these schools wrote. There's the writings. This is going on in Jesus' day. If you want proof of that, you go to the book, Life and Times of Jesus Christ the Messiah. You read all about this stuff. It's all going on right now. This is not a modern thing. Prostitution's ancient. We know this. Divorce is ancient. So the other school, now that's the liberal one, okay? You can get rid of your wife if you don't love her anymore, if she burns your food. You can get married for a day if you're out of town, you know, to save your honor. Now the other school was a little more conservative. It was called the School of Shammai. It was more strict and prevented divorces only in cases of adultery, okay, fornication or other cases of unchastity. Okay, and here we have there. So if you followed Rabbi Hillel, the liberal guy, divorce for the smallest offense, which we just read about. He also allowed the marriage for a day thing. Rabbi Shammai, School of Shammai, divorce because of sexual unfaithfulness, unchastity. Okay, so there's the two schools Jesus is up against. All right? So Jesus is being asked the question during the rule of Herod in his jurisdiction. Okay, so they already know what went down with John the Baptist. So here he is. So depending on his answer, Jesus would be in agreement with one school or the other. You see? And of course, if he sided with one or the other, he would invite the ire of the other, antagonize the other. And then of course, there's always Herod, you give the wrong answer and Herod's guilty, and he'll behead you for that. He's already shown he would. Actually, he asked a question and ended up getting an answer he didn't want. That's what happened to Herod. He didn't want to have to kill John the Baptist. Jesus' cousin. Anyway, so there's the pickle Jesus is in right now, okay? No doubt about it. So look at Matthew 19:4. And he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that which he made them at the beginning, male and female? And he said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and they shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Okay, famous verses, we know these. But Jesus in his answer is appealing first. In verse 4, he's appealing to the creation order right out of the gate. Right? So he ignored the Jewish schools and went straight to what the Bible says, what he told us to write, what he told us to read, right? But God said it is not good to be alone. Didn't he say that in Genesis? We're talking about the creation. Well, it's not good and it's not ideal that divorce is here. It's better for a man to be with his wife, isn't it? Or to have a wife. So Adam and Eve. So that's a divorce ordinance, and as such, divorce is an ordinance then, because God is dealing with the institution of marriage, right? So when Jesus answers and says, yes, made them in female, he goes back to the creation order and says the ideal state of man is married. Okay, and since that's a godly institution, it plays by God's rules. So that's what Jesus is establishing first, the authority of creation. Okay? So, because marriage is created by God, then that's an institution of God, and it's subject to God's purposes and his will. That's what Jesus is putting forth first. All right, so married life is the ideal condition for man. Ideally, in the garden, there was no cause for divorce then, right? Yet in our current age, in our current fallen state, divorce happens, and it's here. It's something we have to deal with. It's an issue today. That's why God enacted laws regulating it, and you'll see that Jesus addresses this later on as well. So yes, divorce is not ideal, but it's here. We have laws to deal with it in the Bible. The same can be said of any other offense on par with divorce. Warfare is real. It's not ideal, we know, but doesn't God have laws on warfare regulating it? Yes, we know. In the ideal condition in the garden, there's no need for warfare. There's no need for laws on murder. There's no need for laws on divorce, because these things wouldn't happen. But we're not in the garden, are we? We're in the world. That's why we have laws regulating this. And what Jesus said, the hardness of your hearts. Okay, that's what he's getting at. No, it's not ideal, but it's here. So in verse 5, we see a fundamental principle is that the moral and physical union of the husband to his wife makes the two of them virtually one flesh, right? We know this. So the relationship between husband and wife is nearer than that of parents and children. It's nearer than that, okay? Therefore, the bond is not easily broken, you see? And since it's God's institution, the union is governed by his terms, even down to the dissolution should that arise. That's what's important. See, it's the marriage and the divorce that are governed by God. I know one's more pleasant than the other, but here we are. So after saying this, the Pharisees had a reply. What was the reply? They say unto him, verse 7, they say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? Now, that is the Pharisees referring to actual Bible law found in Deuteronomy 24. And we'll go there now. Deuteronomy 24:1 is what they were quoting, or what they were referencing. Deuteronomy 24:1. Now, we could read all the way down to 5 because it does deal with divorce. But I'm going to read 24:1 this morning. When a man has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, see, that's what the Jewish tractates were, they took that and ran with it. Because it found no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of the house. This is the question, this is the law they're trying to use against Jesus, right there. And we already went through the Talmud and showed you that this little found no favor in his eyes because he's found some uncleanness, the Jewish interpretation of that went everywhere. It could be over salting the food is uncleanness now. Finding no favor in his eyes. He doesn't think he's pretty anymore. That's what they were doing with this verse. And you know Jewish Phariseeism abuses the law. Okay? So, like I said, this goes all the way down to verse 5, but those other verses after verse 1 will become much clearer after today's explanation of this. So according to verse 1, here in Deuteronomy, we read that there's 3 steps in the divorce process. All right? You see 3 steps there. 1, the husband must write out a bill or certificate of divorce. 2, he must hand deliver it to his wife, certified. And 3, he must then send her away. He must then send her out. Now, notice the husband here is not allowed to just send his wife out into the streets. He can't do that. He has to formally and lawfully go through these steps for the divorce to be lawful and recognized by God. Okay, you can't just send her out in the streets. 3 steps. Write the bill, give the bill to the wife, send her out of the house. Formal steps. This is God's law on it. Now, the bill is very important then. It's not a permission slip. Okay, it's actually very important. For a woman who was sent away, if she did not have this bill of divorce and she went out and married somebody else, that's adultery immediately. And that's death. Remember, we read that in the death penalty. It's actually death by stoning. But that's a capital offense. So the bill is not just a legal document, but also a letter of protection to the woman. She can go out and say, I was kicked out and I'm free from that husband, but how do you prove that? Right? You go and marry somebody else while still legally married to the man's house you are not in any longer. Both you and the man you married are now guilty of adultery. Right? So there's that. So that is actually a letter of protection to the wife saying, yes, I am lawfully divorced. I am lawfully divorced. Okay? As according to the law of Moses. So it's not just a permission slip for the husband to say, yes, you can leave the house or you can get out of here now. No, it was a letter for protection for that woman. Now also in Deuteronomy 24:1, we'll see the word divorcement there. And that actually comes from the Hebrew 3748. All right? Curwy tooth, which means a cutting off or a cutting of the matrimonial bond. Divorce. That's the Hebrew word for divorce. You'll see it used in the word divorcement. Old English. But yes, carry tooth. All right. Okay. Now this word here is only used 3 times total in the entire Old Testament. Just 3. All right. Once in Deuteronomy 24:1, which we just saw here. Also, Isaiah 50 verse 1. We'll go there very quick. Just 3 times in the whole Old Testament. And you guys already know, if it's in Deuteronomy 24 and Isaiah 50, then the only one left has got to be Malachi, right? It's the only one. There's only 3 you read. You're right. All right, so here's Isaiah 50, verse 1. Thus saith the Lord, where is the bill of your mother's divorcement, whom I have put away? Or which of my creditors is it to whom I have sold you? Behold, for your inquiries have you sold yourselves, and for your transgression is your mother put away. Obviously, God is here talking about the future divorce of Israel, the house of Israel. Okay? The 3rd time that divorce is used is Jeremiah 3:8. Jeremiah 3:8. We skipped Malachi because it's not in there. Contrary to what everybody quotes. Contrary to what everybody quotes. Okay, so Jeremiah 3:8. So what are we reading about here? And I saw, for when all causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a bill of divorce, yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also. So this verse is about the future divorce of the house of Judah. Right? He divorced them both. I know, one came 250 years after the other. But remember now, God talks all about how he likens his marriage to Israel and Judah to that of marrying sisters, which Jacob happened to do anyway, right? That's fine. So God's saying, yes, he married Israel before the split, right? So if he divorces Israel, divorces all 12 tribes. That's a done deal. But they're split, so now God's likening that marriage to a marriage of sisters. He still divorced them both. He still divorced them both. Yes, I know a remnant of Judah came back, but they were both divorced. Because if you send them out without giving them a bill of divorce, it's illegal. You can't just send Judah out in the streets. You can't do that. You can't. And that's important. So, in Jeremiah 3, Judah is actually being called out on treachery, which is described as adultery. All right, and as such, adultery we know is grounds for divorce. Judah is absolutely guilty of this. Israel is mentioned here, and also in Jeremiah, for being guilty of the same thing, and Isaiah just told us that. Okay, and notice in Isaiah, Israel, the wife and mother are the same. The wife and children are the same entity. Okay, so he's divorcing the wife and the children. All right, in Isaiah. So both houses of Israel and Judah, according to Isaiah 50, Jeremiah, and you'll read Ezekiel, you read all about it in the prophets, they're both guilty of being harlots and committing adultery, right? The difference between Israel and Judah is that Judah had defiled and desecrated and paganized the land, which is the marital home. The marital home, okay? And they did all of this while pretending to reform and change their ways from time to time, especially when they were threatened, right? And you know the story of Judah. That's what they did. It was all lip service. But they still desecrated the marital home, the land. Now look at verse 10, Jeremiah 3. 3 verse 10. And yet for all this, her treacherous sister Judah has not turned unto me with her whole heart, but fiendly, saith the Lord. So see here, it's just pretending to turn back to the Lord, only when they got in trouble. Only when they got in trouble. You guys know the story. So the divorce of Israel was due to their open apostasy and open unfaithfulness. That's what happened to Israel. They were sent away immediately for that. And you can find evidence of that in Jeremiah 3, verse 6. The Lord also said, in the days of Josiah the king, hast thou seen that which backsliding Israel has done? She has gone up every high mountain and under every green tree, and there has played the harlot. She's not attempting to hide it. And I said, after she had done all these things, turn thou unto me, but she returned not. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And I saw, for when all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away and given her to bill divorce, yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also. So here's both houses guilty of the same thing. One was put away a little earlier, one was put away later. Both harlotry, both adultery, grounds for divorce. One openly did it, Judah secretly did it, and feigned sincerity. Big trouble. And that's been a problem with Israel all down through the ages. Lip service and then acting repentant only when we get in trouble. These are the same people we're talking about. We're the same people. All right, so Judah was divorced and sent away for their secret treachery under the guise of lip service. So there we have all three instances of 3748 carrieth, okay, which we do. Three instances, Deuteronomy 24:1, Isaiah 50, verse 1, and Jeremiah 3, verse 8. All three instances. The next verse, the word that we're going to look at that came from Deuteronomy 24:1 is that word sha'alak, Hebrew number 7971, which means to send away, to send out, to put away, to put out. Okay, and that's step 2 in the divorce process. So we've got divorce, and then we've got the bill of divorce or divorcement. And then now we've got the putting away. And obviously this word here is used almost 1,000 times throughout the whole Bible. So I'm not going to go through and tell you where every time the phrase put out or put away is. But now we'll go to Malachi 2:16, the famous verse everybody knows, right? Everybody knows this one. God hates divorce. All right, I'll read Malachi 2:16. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit that ye deal not treacherously. God hates divorce is not in there. Not in the King James. Now I understand if you have a good Bible with a center column reference, you'll see that the putting away there has a little margin reference, and that means over there, if you look, it says divorce. So God hates divorce is actually in there, isn't it, Reed? Well, no, it's not. God says he hates the putting away, not the divorce, in spite of what the margin rendering says. Okay, but the two words are not interchangeable. They're not. Because in order for a lawful divorce to happen, the wife could not be divorced without being put away. They're not interchangeable. And I'll show you that the other translations actually do have it in there. So let's go to this is the NIV. Malachi 2:16, I read, I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel. It's in the NIV, so if you have that, you're right. It says God hates divorce. New King James, I happen to have. We'll see what it says in Malachi 2:16. For the Lord God of Israel says that he hates divorce. So there's divorce in that one. And you can check the Moffat. You can check Smith and Goodspeed. You can check the Good News Bible. You can check the NASB or the Revised. They all say God hates divorce. So Geneva actually, it does, because it's the 1611, it's the same. They'll have the margin rendering, but it says putting away, putteth away, the putting away. It's the same thing in those Bibles. I didn't bother to check them, except for the 1611, but that's basically checking the King James, isn't it? Nearly. I know. We could get into that, but we're not going to. So anyway, the famous verse, because I was even explaining this to other people, I'm like, we're talking about divorce, and 4 to 5 people are like, yeah, God hates divorce. And I'm like, well, you don't have a King James Bible then, because you're not reading it. It doesn't read that way. It says, for the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. Okay, so it's sad that everybody just knows the one half of the one verse in Malachi from the wrong translation too, but anyway. So look at 13 and 14 of Malachi 2. So here, Malachi 2:13, and this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, receiveth with good will at your hand. This is addressed to Judah. These are Judites doing this in Malachi. Yet ye say, wherefore, because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. And did he not make one? Yet he had the residue of the Spirit. And wherefore one? That he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. Then comes the famous God hates divorce thing. But look at what's going on here. He's accusing Judah of doing something. Here it's dealing treacherously with their wives. Well, what treachery? What treachery? Well, according to verse 14, yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. So, whatever they're doing to their wives are still lawfully their wives. Right? That's treachery. So the treachery to the wife is, while she is a wife by covenant or contract, so she's never fully divorced, they're doing some form of treachery to her. So, what they've done is they've sent their wives out with no bill of divorce. This is what Judah's doing. That's treachery. Because remember what we said about the process and procedure of divorce as laid out by Moses. By having no certificate, the still married wife here in Judah was out on the streets then. They're sending their wives out without a bill of divorce. The treachery here, while she's your wife, is sending her out, not divorcing her then sending her out. Okay, that's what's going on in this verse. Now, if a wife is sent out of the house with no certificate or bill of divorce, then she's between a rock and a hard place, very definitely. By having no certificate, she's still married, and that means she's not divorced. So out of the house or not, she can't go to another man for provision or protection, because that's adultery, death by stoning. She can't go back to the house. She's been kicked out. Her last and only option is to fend for herself, which in those times was nearly impossible. Right? Think of it. A wife kicked out that's not formally divorced, but just is simply out on the streets. She can't fend for herself. She can't go to another man's house. So what's she to do? Well, unfortunately, there was one occupation that a woman could take up to make ends meet. And we all know what that one is. To fend for herself and to make ends meet, either for herself or maybe her children, she had to turn to one occupation, which was the only one acceptable, really, that a wife could hold and make money at. Now, is that not treachery in God's eyes? You cannot sin. Fine, have a reason for divorce, a lawful one. Write her a bill, send her out of the house. Write her a bill, give her the bill, send her out of the house. You cannot just kick them out in the streets. You're dealing treacherously with the companion of your youth, the wife of your covenant. We're not to treat our wives that way. That's why God says in the next verse, he turns right around and says, I hate that putting away. Stop doing it. Divorce her the lawful way. Do not send your wives out in the streets to fend for themselves, or eventually, if they have to, become prostitutes. That's treachery. Don't do that, Judah. Stop that. I hate the putting away. I hate the putting away. Because God already told us what to do in cases of divorce. Moses wrote it down for us. So, a divorce so since divorce is not unlawful, you see, divorce is not unlawful. There's a way to go about it that is unlawful. Because if divorce is unlawful, and this great sin, then God himself is unlawful. And he's committed a great sin. Because we've just read in more places than one that God indeed divorced his wife. Israel and Judah. God's a divorcee. So no, divorce is not this great sin, this evil thing. Now that we understand that, let's go back to Matthew 19:7. All right, so Malachi 2:16. God hated the putting away. God hated the putting away the Judites were doing. It's not God hates divorce. So don't get caught quoting that one again, now that you know better. All right, Matthew 19. We'll go back to Matthew 19. We'll look at verse 7. See what Jesus says, or the Pharisees say. They say unto him, why did Moses command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? All right, so just like in the Hebrew, we're going to have two different Greek phrases that'll cover our bases here. Okay, just like in the Hebrew, because they're quoting the law. So, put away, Greek, 630, apoluao, to dismiss, to depart, to let go, to loosen, to send away, to release. Right? So that's that word, put away, in verse 7. Put her away. That's a phrase there. And you won't find put away or putting away in the Strong's Concordance. You'll have to go to Young's for phrases. And it's not easy to do. You have to go all the way around just to find that number, which I did. But if you see apo there, of course, in the Greek, that always means away from. Away from. Apostasy, to be away from that stays. Okay, stasis, the law. All right, so put away, let go, release. Now, bill of divorcement, here, that word divorcement in the Greek here, since we're in the New Testament, that is 647. Apostasion, a divorce or divorcement. Very simply, that's all that word means. And there you go again, to step away from something that was constant, stasis. To step off of something constant. In this case, you're walking away from the marriage. It's done. The marriage was static. Now it's not. You're going away. Very easy. Greek, Latin. Okay, so Matthew 19:7 reads just as Deuteronomy 24 does. Does it not? If a man puts his wife away, he is to give her a bill of divorce. That's all it says. That's what exactly, so that's fine. Matthew 19:8 says, Jesus, he saith unto him, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, has suffered you to put your wives away, but from the beginning it was not so. He's already said something he's saying something we've already discussed. He's saying divorce came about because of man's sin, man's hardness of heart, and his fallen condition, right? It was not the ideal because in the garden there was no divorce. That's all Jesus is saying. So because divorce is an issue, Jesus goes on to Matthew 19:9. And I say unto you, whosoever put his wife away, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another one, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away does commit adultery. So this is used all sorts of ways in the church and the legal counsel and the spiritual counsel. You know, if you get divorced, you can never remarry. You know, God expected us men and women, us mortals, to get it right the first time. And if it doesn't work out, go through the lawful procedure of divorce and then be alone for the rest of your life. You can't pick up the pieces? No. You can get remarried after you get divorced. That's fine. Okay, that's fine. Just fine. Nothing wrong with that. Because what did Jesus say? It's not good for man to be alone. There is no such thing of not getting it right the first time, one shot, one kill, and then being left alone for your whole life. No such thing. No such thing. God didn't expect that of us. And if you believe that, then you're actually buying into the celibate priesthood thing from Babylon. It's exactly what you're buying into. Forbidding to marry, that's the doctrine of devils, isn't it? We'll get into that next week. So Jesus says here, it's adultery for anyone to marry anyone who's just simply been put away. Isn't that what he said? You cannot marry just anyone who's just in this state. That's adultery. Just like he told us was wrong with Judah's actions. What did he say Judah was doing? You're just putting them away. You're not giving them a bill of divorce. It's adultery any way you go about it. That's what Jesus just said. Anyone who has just simply been put away, if they go out and marry somebody, it's adultery. We already know that. And then he has this exception clause right in the middle of his statement. Except it be for fornication or sexual immorality. This is the thing that messes everybody up. Because we're like, well, yeah, adultery, that's death penalty. If you guys, one or the other dies, the marriage is over. That was easy. Fornication, though, aren't they the same thing? Adultery, fornication? Absolutely not. Not in the Bible. No. Stick with your King James, it looks that way. Stick with your NIV, it looks that way. But it's not. Because they use it interchangeably in those translations. Nothing wrong with those translations. But it's confusing a lot of people. Fornication and adultery are not the same in the Bible law or God's eyes. They're not. We'll figure that out right now. So biblically, what is fornication? I'll tell you. Here's a list. Incest, prostitution, marrying into forbidden lineages, marrying another race, interracial marriages, homosexuality, bestiality, and then, of course, if we know, marriage begets a sexual relation, right? It's the only way it could happen. So marriage to your ex-wife is fornication, and marriage to someone who is not lawfully divorced is fornication, right? So fornication is sexual immorality, right? Is it sexually immoral? Is incest sexually immoral? Marrying someone of a forbidden lineage and then you go and have relations with them, is that sexually immoral? Right, it is. Interracial. So now you're starting to get it, right? So homosexuality, fornication, why? Because of sexual immorality, right? It goes both ways too, male and female. They're called dogs and temple prostitutes in the Old Testament. So it goes both ways, lest we forget. That's a death penalty offense for both genders, and there's only two genders, right? Okay. So why the exception here then? Why is Jesus like, hey, look, you accept for fornication? Well, because the marriages I just listed here are not lawful marriages, and therefore not recognized by God as lawful marriages. Therefore, you can't disannul something that doesn't exist. This is common knowledge to Jesus. Okay? Think about it. So we'll go through the list again. If, in the case of incest, doesn't matter, brother and sister, is that a lawful marriage? If two homosexuals get married, is that lawful marriage in God's eyes? I don't know why you guys get bent out about homosexual marriages being illegal, because it's not like God accepts it. It's not like he's going to let them into heaven, right? Because it's not a lawful marriage. Here's a big one. Interracial relationships. They get married. In God's eyes, is that a lawful marriage in the first place? No, it is not. Are we to recognize that as lawful marriages as Christians? No, we don't. No, we don't. Does it happen? Yeah, it does. Why? Hardest men's hearts. But it happens. If you get married to an animal, in this age happens. People marry their cats and horses and stuff. It's true. And you can even, it sounds wacky, but then have you ever heard of people leaving stuff to their dogs and cats? Right? I mean, you're towing the line doing that. And actually, I've seen where dogs get passed The grandkids get passed up over the dog. Anyway, in this age, you can get married to an animal, okay? Is that a lawful marriage in God's eyes? No, it's not. It's fornication. So you can, if you get married to your ex, who you've already divorced, is that a lawful marriage in God's eyes? No. If you get married to someone who is just put away, is that lawful? No. This is what Jesus is straightening out. And now okay, yeah, that makes sense, Reed. Incest, prostitution, forbidden lineage, homosexuality, bestiality, mixed blood races are not legal, lawful marriages in the first place. There's nothing to disannul, so there's no procedure to go through. Because Deuteronomy 24 isn't for that marriage, because it's not one to begin with. That's why it gets a little weird. So, unlawful sexual relationships, which are unlawful marriages, right, because that's the only way those things come around, are not marriages to begin with. So, and notice here, you cannot remarry your ex-wife. That's considered fornication, and that is unlawful, actually. And you hear a lot of that nowadays. Like, oh, well, I found out I really liked her after all. And then you go back to her. That's unlawful. You can't do that in God's eyes. Absolutely not. The reason for that is very simple if you think about it. If the grounds for divorce in the first place are lawful ones, right, then the evil's compounded if you bring her back. Because either the evil which led to the divorce was real, or the grounds for the divorce were dishonest. That's why you can't remarry your ex, because if the reason for the divorce was lawful, and you guys go through the steps and you lawfully divorce one another, and then you take her back and remarry her, well, what you really have is not a marriage, it's legalized adultery. It is. If the reason you got divorced was real in the first place. That's why, you see what kind of mess that gets into? That's why God said, no, don't remarry your ex. It's impossible. You can't do that. That's fornication. That's an unlawful sexual act. That's what it is. So if the reason for the divorce is unlawful and you get rid of her anyway, well, that's contempt for the law. That's evil. Actually, you got put to death for that too. Right? You can't do that against the courts. So like I said, God has laws in place to regulate divorce. You see, this is what's going on. And these laws on divorce do not make divorce an evil thing. They deal with the evil. Okay? Which, as Jesus said, the evil is here because of the hardness of men's hearts. That's it. So the exception clause in Jesus' statement here is not a redundancy. Unlawful relationships are just that. Unlawful relationships, not marriages. As such, these partners are put away without a bill of divorce. Right? Because there's no marriage. And from God's perspective, none of these fornication offenses constitute a lawful marriage. So, if you are with somebody that was of a forbidden lineage or interracial, right, you are to put that partner away immediately and repent. That's exactly what went down in Nehemiah 13, was it not? Think about it. Did Nehemiah go say, okay, now look, Moses told us what to do in this situation. Write her a bill, give her the bill, send her out. No, that's for a case of marriage. These people aren't married. They say they are. Lawfully, they're not married. There's no reason to go through that legal process. Get them out of your house, repent. Nehemiah 13. That's what went down and what was going on. Fornication. Forbidden lineages, we know that. Interracial relationships, we know that. No need to go through the bill of divorce. There's no marriage to be divorced from. There's no marriage to disannul. It's that easy. So, that's what Jesus is talking about. When you put away your wife without a bill of divorce, she is just simply put away. That's illegal. That's treachery to her. Because she can't do anything else legally without a bill of divorce. You've sent her out of the house empty-handed. God hates that kind of putting away. It's not what Israelites are to be seen doing with their own wives, the wives of the covenant, right? We don't treat the princesses of God that way. That's what he calls us, his daughters, right? You don't treat them that way. You guys have differences, fine. Go through the divorce process. Don't mistreat her by just putting her away. God hates that. Don't treat God's daughters that way. That's what he's telling us to do. Now you understand Malachi. Yes, God hates the putting away that way. If divorce is a necessity, which it is, then you will go through, as Moses told us, these steps. Then it's lawful, and then you guys can start on a clean slate. The New Testament tells us we can start on a new slate, which we will cover next week. We will cover New Testament laws, New Testament stance on divorce and remarriage, because Paul seemed to have a problem with it in the church of Corinth, didn't he? There's a guy sleeping, there was an incest problem, right? There was. Corinth. And we'll also look at, because we have this divorce remarriage, we've got to look at, can a sinful bride be justified? Now that's got biblical implications all over the place, right? Because you've got this whole book called the Song of Solomon, which is dedicated to the love one has for his bride, right? Then you've got these brides and divorce laws, which is a nasty part of marriage, but it's here. Then can that wife of your youth, can she be justified? That's the question, see? So marriage is a huge thing. But no. Can you remarry your ex? No, you can't. Can two people who got divorced lawfully go off and find another partner, pick up the pieces, and live a happy life? Absolutely. Absolutely. God said it's not good to be alone. Yes. If you're lawfully divorced and the other person is lawfully divorced, obviously, you can get remarried. Nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I had a friend, and I've known these things for a long time. I've got a friend, we've known each other 15 years, served together. He got divorced, but he was treated very wrong by his wife, very wrong. She took him to the bank. He was the innocent party, 100% across the board, the innocent party. Absolutely. And for obvious reasons, he was a little buck shy when it came to the issue of marriage again, right? Obviously. But I remember sitting in the car one day and I asked him, I said, hey, look, man, do you still believe in the institution of marriage? After you've gotten burned so badly. Because I asked him that question because I knew it was not good for him to be alone. I knew it. I wanted the best for the man. So I asked him, I said, do you still believe in getting married like one day if that should happen? He's like, I do. I do, Reed, I do. And I thought, that's good. That's good because lawfully, you're divorced. Lawfully, you can be remarried. I hope you find somebody that makes you happy one day because that's the ideal state for my friend and a man of God, right? And that's why I address this. Because if he'd been taught the other way, that once you're divorced, that's it, you can never be remarried, he'd still be alone today. As a matter of fact, I was the one that married him and his wife. I officiated that wedding. I went and officiated that wedding because I knew it wasn't good for him to be alone. So anyway, that's what we'll cover next week. We'll cover New Testament laws on divorce and remarriage. That's all we have for today.